and Deuteronomy is the rereading of the law. I sent this to Dan, but I don't know, it's somewhere out there floating in cyberspace. But we'll get it straightened out here next time. So in Deuteronomy chapter 5, if you want to look along in the scripture, in verse 7, you see the first commandment, which is, you shall have no other gods before me. And the second commandment is in verse 8, you shall not make for yourself an idol or any graven images, as it says in the King James. And he goes on to say there that you shouldn't worship anything else other than him, which he says the reason, he gives the reason there. He says, I'm a jealous God. It's like, if you can remember in high school, if there was someone that you liked and they were looking at somebody else or talking to somebody else, and that was, you hope to have that person as your significant other, and there they were, especially if in terms of a guy, if some guy put his arm around the girl that you liked, that feeling of jealousy, and that can carry you away to bad stuff. But God says, I am a jealous God, in verse 9. So he's jealous of our affection and adoration. The third commandment is in verse 11. It says, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not leave him unpunished who takes his name in vain. Boy, I've heard people say the name of Jesus Christ in anger. My dad used to. I didn't know about this verse at that time. One time I was in a Bible bookstore, and we were just walking around town, another guy and I think, and I was just looking at things, and I was tempted to steal stuff back then, and I had I picked up a pen, and it had a little peephole in it, and you could look in there and see the 10 Commandments, including thou shalt not steal. And I thought that would make a neat pen, and I actually stole that, and I had to confess it years later. I think it's kind of funny that I would see the 10 Commandments and think it's okay to steal that pen. That's crazy, actually, in my mind. That's the only reason I'm smiling, not because I was a thief. So, verse 14 is the fourth commandment. Observe the Sabbath day to keep it holy. You see, I just wanted to say about the name of the Lord. One time I heard someone use Jesus Christ in a profane way, and I said to him, "Were you praying there? I heard you call on Jesus." Well, usually they're angry when they do that, so it's not the best thing to do. Anyway, but you can recognize this, and I really detest that because I love him, and I hate hearing people use his name like that. Going on to the fourth one, observe the Sabbath day and keep it holy. It's clear there that it's the seventh day of the week, in other words, Saturday. So we've heard it said, heard Sunday called the Sabbath. It's better just call it the Lord's Day. The Sabbath day was the seventh day of the week. And I don't want to get into any of these too deeply here. I just want to refresh our memory for the sake of the message that follows. It says, honor your father and mother in verse 16. That's the fifth one. So it doesn't just say your father, because, in the Bible, things kind of center around man. It says that Eve came from man, or Eve came from Adam, so there should be an honor by her given to her husband. And it tends to be man-oriented. Here in this commandment, they're on equal footing. You're supposed to honor your father, and in Jewish thinking, it would have been right to say that. But it says, and your mother, just as much as your father. So how do you honor them? We all kind of know what it means to dishonor, because I got in trouble with the police at least on 2 occasions, and it really was humiliating for my dad. So many people knew him. He was such a great chef. And years and years after he died, and I was back in my hometown, I talked to people, and I remember Bob's cooking. Oh, we always enjoyed that so much. And I go, wow. So, but because of my behavior, I embarrassed him. That's the opposite. We should behave in such a way that we honor the person we came from. What if they decided to have an abortion? We wouldn't even be around to complain, to fuss, to fight with, to argue with, to disagree, to humiliate. You know, it is, we're supposed to honor that person that brought us into the world. You know, my mother left when I was 18 months old, and I never had a mother in my house any day after that, growing up. But I decided I was going to obey that verse, that commandment. That commandment is for me. It's not just for those people. It's for me too. So I wanted to have a good relationship with my mother based on what God said. And my mother and I became very close later as adults. And I miss her as well. And I'm so glad that I obeyed that commandment. Verse 17 is the 6th commandment. You shall not murder. In the King James, it uses the word kill, but the word is more specific than that. And that's the reason in the New American Standard it says murder, because that's what it means. It means to kill with premeditation. You're planning the death of this person. You're going to end their life. So you shall not do that. It does not, there is killing that God even commanded people to do that was righteous because it came from him. And even in Noah's day, he said that if a man sheds the blood of another man, by man shall that man's blood be shed. In other words, I think today, if everyone who pulled a gun on somebody, like in Chicago and other places, that they would be shaking in case they happened to accidentally squeeze that trigger and kill somebody, because it's like killing themselves. That's what's supposed to happen in the law. You're supposed to put that person to death. But anyway, not murder anybody. Verse 18 has the 7th commandment. You shall not commit adultery. God saw when people would worship idols, he accused them of adultery. He even said to Israel, should I give you a bill of divorce? Then in verse 19 it says, you shall not steal. Verse 20 is the 9th commandment. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. Key word there is against. It's lying about your neighbor or lying about anybody with the aim of hurting them. You're telling something that's not true to hurt them. I think a lot of that was going on with President Trump because they didn't like him, and they resisted his policies. And but by the news media, at least, I'm saying. And then in verse 10 is one that is really different from all of the other commandments. Commandment 10, it's in verse 21. The first three, and you could include the Sabbath, is about our relationship with God. How do we relate to God? You worship him and don't worship anybody else, and you certainly don't make a god with your hands to worship, or you don't worship anything that's made with hands, whether it's a car or a boat or anything that you can look at and just adore it. You might make God jealous. Those first four, including the Sabbath, has to do with our relationship with God. The next five have to do with our relationship with others, other people, including parents, as I mentioned. You're not supposed to murder people, commit adultery, steal from people, or bear false witness. So then in verse 21, this is the one that has something to do with inside of a person. It says, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, and you shall not desire your neighbor's house, his field, his male servant, his female servant, his ox, his donkey. You could add to those things any kind of material stuff your neighbor has. And the idea of coveting is, I wish it wasn't theirs. I wish it was mine. I want it to be mine. Because this is an evil thing. It's about dispossessing someone who has something that you want. And you're thinking about dispossessing them, which would go back to stealing, perhaps. But that's how evil coveting. But this is not stealing. This is just what's going on inside you. And it can lead to really desperate stuff. And it says you should not covet, the last line is anything that belongs to your neighbor down here. Anything that belongs to your neighbor. So this is, out of all these laws, God narrowed it down to 10. And then Jesus narrowed it down to 2. He said you should love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, your strength. And then he says, and you should love one another as yourself. Imagine if one day everybody would do that, like just love other people like they love themselves and take care of themselves and take care of each other. Can you imagine that? This world would be transformed. I don't think they'd want to go back to the old self-centered thing. But anyway, so these laws are there to give guidance, and the song that we went through was about David's affection for the law, his respect. Everything he said, the law of the Lord is perfect, enlightening the soul. And so what I want to talk about now is something that's pretty familiar with us, and I know it's a familiar narrative in the Bible, but I want us to be able to learn from it and to be able to apply things to it. Probably next week will be more beneficial to us in some ways. But I want us to consider the story of David and Bathsheba. I have a problem saying Bathsheba in a way like I always have, but her real name in Hebrew is Bat. That's where we get daughter, like a bat mitzvah, or a bar mitzvah for the son. Bat is daughter. And Sheva is of the south. Bat-sheva, that's her name in Hebrew. And that's the lady that David had a problem with. So we want to look at this story today, and it's in 2 Samuel chapter 11. The first 3 verses talk about his temptation. So it says, "Then it happened in the spring, at the time when kings go out to battle, that David sent Joab and his servants with him and all Israel, and they destroyed the sons of Ammon and besieged Rabbah. But David stayed at Jerusalem." That's important because, you know, the battle is out there, and the king would usually be out there where the battle is. But in this case, David stays back. And you know, it right away, when there's idleness, when you don't have any particular thing to do, that's the most vulnerable time to get into trouble. Is when you don't have plans, when you're just free and you feel free and too free sometimes. And no one's around, and anyway, so he stayed back from the battle. He stayed in Jerusalem. Now when evening came, in verse 2, David arose from his bed and walked around on the roof of the king's house. And from the roof he saw a woman bathing, and the woman was very beautiful in appearance. So David sent and inquired about the woman, and one said, "Is this not Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite?" So, you know, I have to tell you this. I don't know whether I ever told you, Marilyn, but I'm telling you now, that the roofs on the buildings, it's usually something like a balcony or a veranda of sorts. You're standing on somebody else's roof, and you walk out the door. I walked out the door of the bedroom one night, and I was looking over Jerusalem, and I wanted to pray and things, and notice the beautiful star-filled sky, and it was so peaceful and quiet. Jerusalem is kind of noisy on most days, not on the Sabbath, but on most days. So I walked out on the roof, and I'm standing there admiring the quietness, the peacefulness. And there was a building beside us, and there was only one light with a window. So light in the darkness tends to draw your attention there. And I looked down there at that window, and there was a woman standing in the window doing dishes. She wasn't bathing, but she was washing dishes. But the thing is she had nothing on from the belt up. And I looked at that. Guess what story came to mind? Yeah, this one right here. And so this is what the reason for all this is that Jerusalem is a hilly city. And the city of David went downhill. The temple was at the top, and it goes downhill, and the king's palace was near the temple. And so for him to walk out on his roof, he's looking down on the town. And right down here is a beautiful woman bathing. And so this took his attention away to the point where he wanted to go check out, see who she is. The report came back that she's the wife of one of his great warriors, even though this man was a Hittite, not a Jew. He was a foreigner who was in Israel's army. And chances are since it was not right for a Jew to marry a foreign woman, it was forbidden, that he found out that she is not only married, but that she is a foreigner. And but there's still an interest there. Why? Because she's beautiful, beautiful. And so in verse 4 it says, David sent messengers and took her. And when she came to him, he lay with her. When she had purified herself, got cleaned up, she returned to her house. The woman conceived, and she sent and told David and said, I'm pregnant. So you see, here is a case where David's eyes made him desire something that wasn't his. And so he took steps to get what he wanted, but then he got something that he didn't want along with that, because what he wanted was not right. And sometimes people engaging in sex, especially outside of marriage, forget that this is not just a pleasureful act. This has to do with reproduction. That's the way families are started. And it's very narrow in your mind if you're only thinking about pleasure, because that act has a whole lot more to do. You can get 20 years out of responsibility that comes from that act that may take a very short time. And but when there's lust involved, it's not the kind of thing that you don't think about all the ramifications and all of the possible things that may come back to you. But in the next chapter, we're going to look at where David was confronted with this, where he was accused of this. And it's like an indictment, because God was displeased. That's the thing we read in the very last verse of this chapter. It says, but this thing that David had done was evil in the sight of the Lord. It doesn't matter what it is in our sight. We can rationalize anything we want to say, then it's okay to go ahead and take what is not rightfully mine. And this is a battle that goes on. I think of 1 Corinthians 10:13. It's a verse I learned early on in my Christian experience. The guy that led me to the Lord, he wanted me to know about this. It says, there is therefore no temptation which has overtaken you that is not common to man. But with the temptation, there is a way of escape. There's a trap, but there's a way of escape. Which one are you going to go with? The way of escape, or are you going to get trapped? Because that's the only choice that's going on here. When the tempter comes your way and tempts you to do something, he may speak to you through friends. Oh, this is a great opportunity. I've had that. And probably you have too. And they may talk to you about the way somebody looks. Oh, man, it'd be great to get that person. Or something like this. Anyway, it's stuff that is bombarding our minds. And even as Christians, we have to be so careful. You need to be careful about what you watch on TV and on the internet, because it's like a computer. The computer can only put out what's put into it. If you got dirt going into the computer, dirt's going to come out of it. And it's the same way with anything. You listen to music that is sexually oriented and graphic and racist and everything else. And it is ugliness, even if you like the melody, the way the music moves you. It still is, music is like a donkey, a beast of burden. It carries a load. And when you're listening to stuff, the load that it's carrying is trash that it's putting into your heart and mind and your way of thinking. But you love that sound. You like that guy. You like that woman who's doing it. And so we need to be careful as believers that we don't get swept up, because this is David. This is David we're talking about. King David, the one who slew Goliath, but was brought down by a woman. It's amazing. And by the way, it's after this whole event that God says, David is a man after my own heart. So in order to get the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey used to say on radio, before he said good day, you have to come back next week. I'm sorry, I have to just put that little tickler in there. But anyway, I'd just like to quickly touch on some of these other items here. So the big cover-up starts. He knows he's done wrong, and the pregnancy is there. It's like saying, you've done something you shouldn't do. And, you know, let's face it, people. What is the worst thing you've ever done? Think about that. Well, I don't want you to dwell on it, because if you belong to Jesus, it's been washed away from you. But some of us are old enough to think about the worst thing we've ever done. What if that were talked about with your name on it in church today? Oh, no, wait a minute. What if it were put in the Bible for all generations of all believers to read about? That's what happened here. We're reading about what happened to a man that God loved, and that loved God, and that loved his law. So the temptation is common to man. This isn't something that doesn't happen to a lot of people. Probably most people are tempted morally to see you're being tested. I'm not here to condemn anybody. I would have to condemn myself, because I know what's gone on in my heart, and you know what's gone on in yours. And we know that it's a battle to always please God. But we need to learn some things about that, so that we're not just like a dumb sheep wandering off into a lion's den. So then the cover-up starts in verse 6. So then David sent to Joab, and send me Uriah the Hittite, have him come back. And what he's trying to do here is bring him back into town, and he wants him to go down there and sleep with his wife, so that it'll look like the pregnancy is from Uriah. Let's see now, does that bring back one of the commandments we read? It kind of has to do with false dealing, false witness. It's not exactly like lying, but it's like cheating and trying to make something out like it happened that didn't happen. That's not true. And so he goes down there, but he won't sleep with his wife. He stays outside, and David calls him back. Why didn't you go into your house and be with your wife? He says, because my men are out there in the field right now. They're in temporary dwellings like a tent, and a lot of them are sleeping on the ground, and I'm not going to sleep in my bed with my wife. I just wouldn't feel right about it. You see that kind of loyalty of a good man and faithfulness? And he's thinking of his men that he has to stand beside and fight with. And when you're in war, you depend on each other, and it makes a camaraderie. And then David takes him, and in verse 13, it says that David asked him in to come in and eat and drink, and the scripture says that David got him drunk. And he thought he'd go down and sleep with his wife drunk. He still didn't go. So the morning came, and David had to have plan B, because plan A didn't work. So he wrote a letter to Joab, the general, and Uriah didn't know what was in that letter. It was for Joab. And he delivered the letter, and the letter said, put Joab up at the front of the line. When you attack the wall, and have some of the men draw back, so that he's really out there almost like by himself. And he got killed in the process. So in verse 17 it says, David's servants fell, and Uriah the Hittite also died. And then Joab sent a messenger back to David, and he says in verse 20, if it happens that the king's wrath rises up, and he says to you, why did you go so near to the city to fight? Did you not know that they would shoot arrows from the wall? And then he gives an example. Who struck down Abimelech? And says, did not a woman who was up on the wall, because Abimelech got too close and she dropped a stone down and hit him on the head and killed him. And so actually Joab's response to tell this messenger, say, you know that this kind of thing happens in war. And then in verse 22 it says, a messenger departed and came and reported to David, and he told him all of this, and told him how Uriah got killed and things. And that was what David wanted to hear, really. He's not interested in details about the battle. He's interested to hear that Uriah is dead. And then it says, in verse 25, David said to the messenger, thus you shall say to Joab, do not let this thing disturb you or displease you, for the sword devours one as well as the other. Make your battle against the city and overthrow it, destroy it. So that's like when I was in basic training, they held up a rifle, and they said, this rifle that you're going to be holding in your hand is not your friend. It could kill you as much as it could kill an enemy. If you don't take care of it, if you let the enemy get it, you could be killed with the weapon that you were given. That's kind of David's response. Well, the sword devours one as well as the other. That is a cold-hearted response. Cold-hearted. You see, the problem with the immoral act that he made is it does tend to make people cold-hearted, and you don't care about the opposite sex. In fact, there's stories in the Bible. One of the things that came to David's house as a result of this was a sexual act that was something close to incest. And the man who raped the woman hated her afterwards. Hated her. And so this kind of thing, this immorality, it can make you cold-hearted and uncaring about people. So he said, the sword kills one person like it kills the other. That is coldness. It reminds me of Hillary Clinton when she was lying about Benghazi. And the senators were asking her about these people who died and why they didn't, she was Secretary of State, why you didn't send in people to protect. There were soldiers ready to go. They wanted to go to defend the ambassador and the soldiers that were with him. Just a few, a handful. There's a story about their bravery. But it says, I saw her, how she responded. She said, "They're dead already. What difference does it make? Like, why are we talking about it? They're dead." That's coldness. Oh, I'm so glad that woman didn't become president. Oh, my goodness. Such cold-heartedness. That's what David is saying here. Oh, the sword kills one person like it kills the other. It killed Uriah. Okay, he's gone. And so it says, now when the wife of Uriah heard that Uriah, her husband, was dead, she mourned for her husband. And the last verse, when the time of mourning was over, David sent and brought her to his house, and she became his wife. That was not right. There's another law that's called the levirate marriage. And that means that the brother of the husband who died is supposed to give children to his brother's wife so that she has someone who will take care of her in her old age. It's called a levirate relationship or marriage. And but David moves in, and there's no chance for Uriah's brother, who's not even mentioned, to give Bathsheba a child, but he takes her as a wife. One of the things I want to do, which I won't do because of the time we've gone over as it is go through some of the 10 Commandments. I'll just mention a few. That when you take something that belongs to somebody else, like a wife, it's stealing. It's stealing. And I meet women on the boardwalk who don't care that they can see a wedding ring. They don't care about that. They think, well, if I can get that man, I'll do it. That's how hard-hearted, cold-hearted some of these people. You think it's just men? It's not. Bathsheba even may have known that David went out there for a stroll in the evening to look out on the city, and she may have thought, sometimes beautiful people can get all vain about it, and if nobody sees their beauty, then it's like gone to waste, and she may have wanted to be admired. I don't know what goes through the minds of people. I'm not blaming her. This was his deed. He sought her out. But in any case, David's desire was that he got something that was not his. The commandment, you shall not murder. What did he do with Uriah? He had him set up with a premeditated plan to get him killed. It's kind of the same thing. It's implied. And the way he was treating Bathsheba was almost like idolizing her. I don't know how beautiful she was, but there are a lot of beautiful people around, and if that's going to put a ring in your nose and like lead you around, then all beautiful people, just remember this, the most beautiful people, they all get old and they all get put in the grave. How do they look after that flesh that they had? They can be the most beautiful. Marilyn Monroe, what does she look like now in her grave? What does her body look like? That pretty face, and it's not pretty. And so, but the thing here that happened inside of him was a battleground in his heart where he coveted. What did we read about in that commandment? The first thing mentioned in Deuteronomy, it's houses in Exodus where it's originally given. But in the rereading, it's you shall not covet your neighbor's wife. You know, I was sitting in my van, ready to go kind of put finishing touches on this message, and I saw a neighbor lady, and she was really pretty. And man, I am so glad I don't want even stuff going on in my brain, because it hurts. It would hurt me this morning if I went wild with that in my mind. And thank God for his word. Just like David said in Psalm 19 that we sang. It just helps corral all of the stupid wildness and sin nature that sometimes rages inside of us. We want what we want. No, get transformed to come to the place where you want what he wants for you. That is life-changing. I just want to end this with this thought. David was truly a great man. Jesus Christ came through David. He's called the Son of David, by the way. So we're not talking about a nobody. But I would say this to you and to me, that if David fell, when he regarded the law like he did, like in Psalm 19, if he, the great man, the king, the progenitor of Jesus Christ through Mary, if he fell, what about you and me? We may not do what he did, but we may do what we do. We need to be careful. We need to be warned. And we need to take the story seriously, because there's traps out there waiting. They're waiting for you. It's designed for you. Satan watches you, and he knows where he can tempt you and where it's useless. So just keep the story in mind, and let it help make you aware of what's going on, because it went on in one of the greatest man's lives in Bible history. And you'll see in the next chapter, and if we were to follow this out, one of the things that came to David's house was violence as a result. He said, violence will not depart from your house. I'll just tell you a little next Sunday part. 3 of his sons died violently.